I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Emmy nominee Ariel Marx, composer for A Small Light. Ariel, first of all, congratulations on your first ever career Emmy nomination.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
How does it feel now that you will always be referred? You can go to the grocery store and say, I am actually Emmy nominee Ariel Marx. How do you feel about that?
I won't be insufferable and be doing that in any way when it unless it's appropriate, but it's amazing. Like it's the show is so beautiful, and it made that, this was I knew it had something going for it in terms of, buzz for the Emmys, but I never predicted anything or expected anything. So this was a really great surprise.
So if you don't mind me asking, if you weren't really seeing it coming, like what happened on the morning of when we found out, hey, guess what? You've been nominated.
So I kept going back and forth. Like it was pretty dreadful the like 3 or 4 days until it happened, because I just wanted it to be over with. I wanted to know or not know, and then just move on with whatever happened. And but the morning of, I kept going back and forth whether I wanted to listen to it and I was ignorant about it, and I didn't know that they would just release a PDF of all of the creative arts and they weren't gonna announce it. So I was like listening to all of the the regular primetime Emmy announcements, and my publicist called me and they said they'd only call if I got nominated. And so I was like, I knew it was the call. It was very exciting. It was just really, really I'm just so humbled by it. That's so wonderful.
Yeah, I always love to ask nominees what that was like, especially the first one, because it's so special. You'll always remember it.
Yeah.
So look, what's so special about your work on this series, this limited series, is that every episode is so different and so unique, really, in terms of its style. And the episode, I suppose, that's been nominated, although you're nominated for the show, but it's What Can Be Saved. To me, I mean, such a no-brainer, really. They're all great, but this one blew my mind. It's so exceptional. So can you talk us through, firstly, the choice and why you thought this was the highlight track from the whole score, and what you most loved about it, why you wanted it to be submitted?
Yeah. So the episode 7, the show is a dramatization of the woman named Meatgees and her husband Younggees, who spent 2 years hiding the Franks. Anne Frank and her family and 2 other people, Dr. Pfeffer and the Van Pels, for over 2 years before they were all sent to concentration camps. The series, for the most part, up until episode 7, which is the one that I submitted, it lives in the world of really towing the line between humor and gravitas, right? Like it's a very historical, important story, but they didn't shy away from showing the minutia of everyday life. And a lot of that was imperfect and funny and charming and loving, and just people dealing with the worst of times in such brave ways. So episode 7 is when it all comes tumbling down, and when the Nazis do storm the annex and they take everyone away. And what is so astonishing about this episode is it's done all in real time. So you see, essentially, the annex was the building that they were in was several floors. There were many ways in which they could have been stopped or diverted. And they had close calls before, and so as soon as we go into the episode, beginning in the episode, it's real time how Meep and everyone else in the office is trying to divert them from getting upstairs. And it's basically wall-to-wall score. And I submitted it because it was the most challenging episode for me. It's probably the most music forward episode. And it was like a master class I taught myself in how to maintain tension over 30 minutes, like unrelentlessly. But it was the kind of tension where it wasn't, it was Meep from here down had to be completely calm, and she had the worst of, the worst anxiety ever in her, in her mind, and everyone else, but she kept a very calm composure. And so how does music say what she can't show? So that's the reason I picked that episode.
It's really the perfect explanation, because that's what music does. And this track, particularly on the album, it goes for about 8 minutes. So it's a condensed version of the whole episode. It starts with this haunting mix of bass and synth elements that are underpinned by this propulsive, like heartbeat like rhythm. And immediately I was feeling really unnerved. And then it moves into melancholy string elements, and then it just really hits you. It's very, very visceral. So what was the techniques and instruments that you typically would want to employ to can create that sense of peril and unease on a track like that?
Yeah, so the two tracks on the album that are most that play in this episode are called The Raid of Opekta and What Can
Yeah,
Be Saved. And they are both, Raid of Opekta is 10 minutes, What Can Be Saved is 8 minutes. And those are
yeah,
pretty long cues in terms of how, like, the average length of cues for narrative series. So the big thing was we wanted to make the score feel contemporary, and but we didn't want to make it feel anachronistic. So we wanted Meep to feel like you want to be able to see yourself in her and everyone in the story, and but also not be taken out of it because we're using a palette that is completely anachronistic and impossible in the era. But basically we ended up using more contemporary palettes for all of the tension scenes. A lot of the joy and the happiness and the love story of it all and the friendship, those were a bit more tritraditional instrumentation, but this tension was very much rooted in lots of extended techniques on the strings. So lots of kind of uglier, twisted sounds. There's the use of electronics, but pretty organic sounding electronics. I'm trying to think of what else. Percussion, and really kind of sporadic percussion, and also like lots of mix of meters. So we're never staying in one, it doesn't feel like we're staying in one tempo or one level of adrenaline, but it's constantly switching hands. And even like the minutest of colors popped through in that mix, because they're just she's sitting there unable to do anything. And so it was about layering and threading all of these different colors in, more so with The Raid of Opekta. And then What Can Be Saved, it was really interesting because the showrunner, I think, kind of brilliantly directed me down in the moment that we're seeing the Franks come out of the annex for the first time in 2 years, and they're seeing sunlight only to be pushed into the back of a truck to be driven away, and we never see them again. That moment, of course, like the easier thing to do would be to score that in such a grand way and as the emotional apex of the series, but it ultimately needed a much more quiet moment. And it was I think it's just piano and strings and electronics, and it's very simple. And I think that direction made it feel so much more poignant and relatable, and you don't disconnect yourself because of the grandeur, but you look right at it. So that was the approach.
that is the perfect explanation. It really makes a lot of sense to me now that you went in that direction. It's very, very effective. I don't know whether it's just me. Of course it isn't, but like sometimes film and TV scores really have such an impact on me. I listen to them in the car or on my headphones, and this one is certainly one of those. I found it really, really compelling. So final question is, when you're going to those really dark moments or the really, really deeply emotional moments, do you find that the series visual palette or the actors' performances sometimes influence the choices that you make?
And you said the visual palette and the performances.
Yeah,
Well, of
when
course,
you
like
yeah,
the score is always last in line, so
yeah,
we have no choice but to react to those elements. More subconscious, the performances, I would say probably, although actually hearing the costume designer and production designer on the Emmy campaign discuss how, how colors changed differently inside the annex, outside of the annex, what colors meant threat, and I'm sure, I absorbed that subconsciously, as I'm sure everyone else did. But in terms of performances, the performances are so contemporary, and they, they are kind of stretching to the very end of what you believe people might have been talking like during that time. You know, you hear a lot of playful conversation, you hear a lot of they just aren't reverent and perfect like we usually think of, you know, people almost 80 years ago. From, you know, we tend to kind of paint them in sepia tones and in unrelatable ways. And anyway, the contemporary performances and also the subtlety, like Liev Schreiber's performance as Otto is one of the most tender, just really unassertive, beautiful, warm performance. And that gentleness and love very much influenced how I scored the scenes in the annex.
I can only imagine. Yeah, and this show should have been nominated across the board. It's so beautiful and so haunting, and I'm really glad that you're at least nominated for your first time. And thank you for your time today. We'll bring you back shortly for the group chat.
Thank you.